Political upheaval, economic crisis, and a corruption scandal. Brazil is at a crossroads. What's the way forward? I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. "2015 was not Brazil's easiest year. Several widespread protests across the country called for change. Confidence in the president, Dilma Rousseff, reached a record low. A scandal at state-run oil conglomerate Petrobras exposed corruption, and the economy stagnated and began a free fall. And 2016 isn't starting off much better. For The View from Brazil, we're joined now by CCTV's Lucrecia Franco from Rio de Janeiro. And Lucrecia, President Rousseff is now facing impeachment. She has been facing that for a few months over that corruption scandal that's rocked her government. What effect is this having on the country?
It has been called the perfect storm. President Dilma Rousseff is not only facing an impeachment that has created a political paralysis in the country, but also one of the worst recessions in decades. She started facing calls for her impeachment right after she won her second term last year, with people taking to the streets and asking her to step down, not only because of the corruption scandal at Petrobras, because of the weakening of the economy. Brazilians are and still are angry with all this situation, because they have been coming from a decade of booming. And after that, Brazil's politics became more like a soap opera, with a divided opposition that opened impeachment proceedings last December. So what is next? Well, now after the Congress recess ends this month, the lower house needs to reach a decision on the impeachment and send it to the Senate. However, analysts say an impeachment is unlikely, as the opposition is divided and could hardly reach the two-thirds of its 513 deputies to approve it and send it to the Senate. And it's in the Senate that Rousseff has a solid backing. Protest also has lost steam, and people here seem more worried about their own future than about Dilma Rousseff's political future. Anand.
You mentioned the economy earlier on. You're saying that it's going through one of its worst recessions right now. This is an economy that was one of the most successful in the past few years. What's the outlook now? What are we looking at?
Well, it's not good at all, Anand. Maybe the worst situation Brazil is facing now it's the economic troubles. Analysts estimates that in 2015, the economy contracted 3.5% and will shrink around 2.5% in this year, in 2016. One of the primary causes is the plunging of the commodity prices. Brazil depends on iron ore exports and soybean exports, among other goods, that have fallen sharply in the last 5 years. Analysts believe Brazil should cut spending, but there has been no will from Congress. Brazil's credit rating as well has been lowered to junk by Fitch and Standard & Poor's, adding pressure to the government that has been unable to make fiscal adjustments. So numbers now speak for themselves. Over 10% inflation rate, some 1.5 million jobs lost last year, and the real, the Brazilian currency, losing a third of its value against the dollar. Forecasts are not good at all, and economists agree that growth should only resume in 2018.
Okay, thanks, Lucrecia. That's CCTV's Lucrecia Franco reporting from Rio de Janeiro. Joining me now is Lígia Moura Costa, a legal studies professor and practicing attorney from Sao Paulo in Brazil, and from Rio de Janeiro, Bernardo Sorge is a professor of sociology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Lígia, let me start with you. If we look at the problems that Brazil is facing now, some formidable economic problems, we have a recession, unemployment, a rising debt level, and the outlook doesn't look good for 2016, as our reporter just told us. Yet this was a country that was one of the big success stories of the last few years. How did it go from boom to bust in such a short time?
I would say that we are doing fine, but not that fine. And everybody knew since 2014 and even in the end of 2013 that the economic politics was not the right one, and that we would face some problems in the near future. But in any case, I think that people did not expect that the economic policy would be, or the economic problems would be that hard or on us as we have been suffering the last year.
Bernardo, a lot of fingers are being pointed at the president, Dilma Rousseff. Her approval ratings have been in single digits for a very long time. Why are Brazilians so disenchanted with her government right now?
Let me thank you for the question, but if I may advancing Lydia's comment, I think it's important, first of all, to remember that although we are in a triple crisis, political, economic, and even moral, this crisis is still being elaborated within the democratic institutions. This means that part of the crisis is due also to the fact that the justice system is independent, that the federal police is autonomous, and this is creating a crisis that in principle should bring improvement in the general administration of society. Now, unfortunately, President Dilma has a lot of positive aspects, but she's not a politician. She's not a politician by career. She wasn't ever elected to any public post other than presidency. She's basically a manager, and Brazil needs very good politicians in a political system where you have 28 parties in the Congress, and to produce a coalition, you need really to be a very good politician capable of unifying different parties with different interests. And in this sense, President Dilma really was not up to the job.
Ligia, if we look at the Petrobras scandal, that is something that has dominated Brazilian politics for some time now. There was a poll that was published last October in which 2/3 of Brazilians blame the president for what is happening at Petrobras, or what has happened there. Why are Brazilians blaming her particularly for this?
Actually, I think that the perception of Brazilians it is that she's responsible, or at least she knew about the scandal and she has done nothing. Only because, first of all, because she was Minister of Energy during the time that corruption has already started at Petrobras at the level that we have the corruption in Petrobras today. Second, she was the president of the administrative board, and as the president of the administrative board, she cannot say that she didn't know about that, otherwise what kind of president of the administrative board she has been. And last but not least, it seems that the Pasadena acquisition in the United States, where she was also the president of the administrative board, it has been approved by her. So it's quite complicated to think that she was not responsible for what has happened in Petrobras, or at least that she did not knew, or she did not know what was actually happening in Petrobras. And it's really a pity when we hear on TV that she says that she's fighting corruption. If she was actually fighting corruption, she should have started in Petrobras, where she did have a position that would allow her to take really measures and to avoid what has happened to the company today.
Bernardo, what is the president's future right now? She's facing these multiple crises. Do you think she will survive them? I mean, what is the status of the impeachment proceedings?
A good question. Of course, if I knew the future, I would be doing business in the stock market, but I don't know the future. What I can tell you is that at this given moment, I don't see the impeachment coming in the political context. First of all, because the opposition, impeachment is a political process at the end of the day. Is if you have enough majority in the Congress, and you need to have a two-thirds majority. And in principle, the opposition doesn't have this majority. Now, it's in general a feeling of frustration and apathy. People are unsatisfied, but at this moment I don't see that it's going to be expressed in a major political move that would be an impeachment.
Bernardo, to be fair to the President and her government, not all of the country's economic woes have been of their own making. If we look at a country like Brazil, it is dependent on exporting commodities, and there's been a sharp drop in global commodity prices. And now, of course, the country is facing another crisis, which is the Zika virus, which appears to have taken hold in some parts of the country. We can't blame her totally for this, can we?
Anna, may I say that you are right in general terms, but if you go into specifics, I wouldn't agree so much, in the sense that if you see similar countries, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, they are not doing so good as they did for a few years ago, but still they are on the positive side in the sense of a low but real economic growth. Brazilian last year economic growth is going to be -4, and with inflation of more than 10. This is the miracle. It's not easy to have a negative economic growth and inflation of 10–11%. And I think a major part of this is of the making of the Dilma's government and Dilma's government responsibility. Of course that the international scenario is not helping, but most of our problems are of our own making.
Okay, I have one final question, and I want to put the question to both of you. And let me start with you, Legia, and that is, what kind of impact is the Zika virus having in Brazil right now?
Just for a cultural information, the mosquito that carries the virus has been eradicated from Brazil in the 50s. However, the mosquito returned to Brazil, and what it is very clear, it is that the government has not taken the necessary measures to actually fight and to kill the mosquito. That's why nowadays we are facing this epidemic, if I can say like that, concerning the Zika virus. As a Brazilian, just use repellent and try to push the government, that the government makes something and try to go back fighting the mosquito as they used to do it many years ago.
Okay, Bernardo, what is your view on this, on the spread of this virus?
At this moment is a major human tragedy that is going beyond the frontiers, and hopefully, because of that, maybe we have also major laboratories in the world that will begin to try to find, besides fighting the mosquito, also some type of vaccine, because this is a major human tragedy in Brazil today.
Okay, that's where we have to leave this part of the discussion. Thanks to both of you for joining us. We are going to take a break right now, but coming up, what's on the horizon for Brazil? Plus, a look at the youth movement across the country. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back. We're talking about Brazil's mounting challenges and how the country will move forward. Joining me now from Sao Paulo is Fabio Osterman, one of the founders and a former coordinator of the Movimento Brasil Livre, the main civil society group active on the opposition to the current government in Brazil. And from the U.S. state of Utah, Paulo Sotero is director of the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Paulo, let me start with you. As we've been hearing, Brazil facing myriad economic problems right now, and of course that corruption scandal as well. We also heard from our reporter that the economy could shrink by 2.5% to 3% this year. Now, some measures have been taken by the government. Discretionary spending has been cut, and they've made it a little bit more difficult for the unemployed to collect benefits. The eligibility requirements have been toughened. But given all that, this is a crucial year for Brazil. It hosts the Olympics this year. What's the outlook?
The outlook is not very promising. As you stated, the economy is bound to continue to shrink. Now most analysts believe that we will be talking about economic growth only in 2017, maybe even in 18. The president facing an impeachment process, impeachment that is unlikely to be successful. The president will stay in power, but she has not been able to harness the support in Congress, in her own coalition, in the public necessary to confront the situation. So it is a complicated era for Brazil, a complicated moment. Anti-corruption investigations continuing. Actually, yesterday a new phase started, now getting the investigations very close to former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who has been sort of the main supporter and mentor to President Dilma Rousseff. All in all, a very negative outlook at this point.
Fabio, you represent an important group in Brazil, young people. You're the leader of a youth movement. What do young people want to see in Brazil right now?
Young people in Brazil want to see change because we are not satisfied with the ways our country has been going, and we're currently undergoing one of the worst economic and political crises of our whole history, certainly the worst times in the last 20 years. Especially because we have been going through a period of growth, a period of development that was stopped by some economic measures and political misdemeanors that led the country to this situation. Inflation is rising, unemployment is rising, and we don't see in any foreseeable future a different direction in this path. The government doesn't know where to go. The president seems like she doesn't have a clue of what she should be doing. She sometimes seems to be swerving to the right, to the left, but she doesn't have the conviction to know where to lead the country, especially the economy. And this is something that everybody knows. I'm not very confident that she will be impeached before the local elections that we have this year in October. But I think the scenario is very uncertain, and I personally don't believe that she will finish her term, which means that she will not continue to be the president until 2018, because the crisis is getting deeper and deeper.
Paulo, there's some very bitter medicine being prescribed for Brazil's ills. Given that the president is under a cloud of impeachment right now, is she the person that is going to be able to administer this medicine? I mean, what they're talking about here is more spending cuts. They're talking about austerity.
Yeah, as Fabio mentioned, she clearly is not the person that will have the capacity to do the very difficult measures that will have to be implemented to rebalance fiscal accounts in Brazil, to put Brazil back on a path to economic growth. The fact is that, we have an institutional democracy in Brazil. You cannot remove the president at will. It has to follow a process. The process started by the opposition, has not, and it's unlikely at this point to succeed. I don't believe that the mobilization of in the streets has indicated any desire from the people to add to the pressure, in part because the opposition to President Dilma Rousseff has not been able to offer also a credible alternative. So the country seems to be adrift. There is a crisis of leadership, essentially, and nothing is offered to counter the government of President Dilma Rousseff, which is supported by barely 10% of the population. as Fabio mentioned, the situation, the economic situation continues to deteriorate. What could change this is that this deterioration will at some point cause a reaction because unemployment is going up, unemployment benefits are running out. I was just in São Paulo, and you can see that there is a sense of great apprehension, enormous frustration, because Brazil was going in a totally different direction until about 2 years ago. There is also a sense in Brazil that this crisis was created in Brazil, this is self-imposed, and the solutions will have to be found in Brazil by Brazilians through the institutional channels we have. The frustration is that we seem to continue to be in gridlock.
Fabio, Forbes magazine, a very influential business and financial magazine, says that the Brazilian political system as a whole is lacking in credibility. Do you believe that to be the case, that the political system here is a major part of the problem in Brazil?
Well, the political and economic problem in Brazil are completely intertwined. I tend to agree partially with what Paulo said, but I also disagree about some of the things he said. For instance, in Brazil we see in the streets, and the polls show this very, very clearly, that no more than 15% of the population support our government, but there's no political project on the opposition. And this is due also to the fact that Brazilian democracy is still not that well developed. In terms of political parties, the only one political party that's fully institutionalized, as we say in the political science literature, is the Workers' Party. All the other parties are just an amalgamate of political interests that can vary from state to state. And this lack of credibility in the political system has been creating a gridlock. At the same time that Brazilians, and this means civil society, business, and the political establishment, don't want our president to remain there, there's not enough will and enough strength to take her out through impeachment, through the cassation of her candidacy, which is a much more complex process. But there's no other way than to keep on putting pressure in the political system to do its role, and to put some pressure for the government to let the press and our FBI, our federal police, to work properly as they have been doing, to try to go deeper in the investigations about the corruption scandals that Brazil has been living through.
We have unemployment rising in Brazil, as we've heard from yourself as well as other guests. What is the job market like for young graduates in the country, and for other job seekers as well?
Yeah, I can see that from my friends and colleagues from the movement and from other networks I take part in. When I graduated from school 8 years ago, things were completely different. Right now, people are much more reluctant to join the labor market, and they're considering other endeavors in life because jobs are shrinking, the wages are shrinking, the number of jobs is shrinking, and an incredible amount of people are even considering something very new for Brazilians, because Brazil is not a country that has a very great tradition of migrating abroad. If you take, for instance, the Brazilian colony in the U.S. is proportionately one of the smallest in the country, especially if you compare it with other Latin American countries. But this reality is slowly changing, because lots of Brazilians are starting to consider the idea of migrating because they don't see a future here. And this is very, very, very dangerous for the future of the country, because we're suffering a process of brain draining. Because most of the well-educated, highly skilled workers are starting to contemplate the idea of leaving the country, and this brings the prospects of a dark future for our recovery.
Paolo, this might be hard to believe, but only 6 years ago, it was Brazil that was lending money to the IMF. In 2009, Brazil lent the IMF $10 billion. The GDP in the country in 2010 rose to 7.5%. It was the 5th largest economy in the world. Do you think it's going to get back there?
Well, it will get back there. The same resources that we had before, we still have. Fabio is absolutely right about the danger of losing well-qualified manpower now, the skilled workers that we need, that we still lack. But the crisis is an opportunity to understand what happened, to attack the problems with courage. The problem in Brazil is a problem of confidence. Once the politicians, political leaders, manage to get out the message or to instill confidence that the country will be governed in a reasonable way, in